That afternoon, two detectives returned to her apartment. They asked her to tell the story again. She did. Her voice cracked in the same places. Her hands trembled the same way. But tiny details shifted. The position of a lamp. The direction he walked. The moment he left. The detectives exchanged a look. They asked again. Marie tried harder. She concentrated. She closed her eyes. She described the duct tape, the cold floor, the pressure of his weight, the sound of his breathing behind the mask. They stopped her. They told her stories like this were difficult to believe without perfect consistency. They told her false reports hurt real victims. They told her they needed the truth. Marie said she was telling it. They leaned closer. They asked if she had imagined it. They asked if she was lonely. They asked if she wanted attention. By 6:40 p.m., the tone had changed. Marie was no longer a victim. She was a problem. The detectives left, promising to return. That night, Marie locked her door and pushed a chair against it. She slept for 20 minutes at a time, waking at every sound, heart racing, convinced the mask would be standing above her bed again. 3 days later, police came back. They said the evidence did not support her story. They said her account contained contradictions. They said the security camera at her building showed no suspicious activity. They said her neighbors heard nothing. They said false reports were crimes. Marie stared at the floor. She whispered that she was sorry. On August 16, 2008, Linwood police formally classified her case as unfounded. On August 18, they asked her to sign a statement recanting her accusation. She did. She did not understand the words. She only understood their tone. Cold. Final. When the paper slid across the table, she felt something collapse inside her chest. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly, like a bridge giving way far from shore. The city of Linwood never issued a press release. No headline announced that a young woman had been assaulted and then disbelieved. There were no protests, no cameras, no public outrage. There was only Marie. She stopped eating. She stopped answering calls. She stopped going to work. When her social worker asked what happened, Marie said nothing. She had learned that silence was safer than truth. Weeks passed, then months. The DNA kit from her hospital exam was boxed, labeled, and placed on a shelf. It would remain untouched. Across Washington state, life continued. People married. Children were born. Buildings went up. Crimes happened. Cases were closed. Marie moved to another apartment, then another city, then another job. She tried to become someone else. But at night, when the world was quiet, she still felt the zip ties, still smelled the tape, still heard the voice telling her not to tell, and the voice of the detective telling her no one would believe her anyway. She was 18 years old when the system decided she was lying. She would be 26 before anyone admitted she was telling the truth. But that story had not begun yet. For now, there was only a report marked unfounded, a confession signed under pressure, and a young woman learning that survival was not the same thing as justice. In America, the law promised protection. In reality, belief was conditional, and Marie Adler had just discovered the cost of not meeting it. In September 2008, less than 1 month after Marie Adler signed away her own truth, autumn arrived quietly in Linwood, Washington. Leaves turned yellow along city sidewalks. Rain returned in thin gray sheets. Life continued in the careful, ordinary way it always had. But for Marie, time did not move forward. It folded inward. She slept during the day and stayed awake at night, lights on, back against the wall, listening for footsteps that never came. Her social worker noticed the change. Her voice had grown smaller, her posture folded inward, like a person trying to disappear without leaving. The police did not call again. The case was closed. The story officially was over. But violence does not obey paperwork, and truth does not expire when it is ignored. On November 5, 2008, 200 miles south, in the city of University Place, Washington, another woman woke before dawn with her hands bound behind her back. Her name was Kara, a 20-year-old college student living near the campus of the University of Puget Sound. She had fallen asleep studying. She woke to a man standing over her bed, wearing a black ski mask. He spoke calmly. He told her not to scream. He tied her wrists with zip ties. He blindfolded her. He raped her. Then he left. At 6:11 a.m., Kara called 911. This time, the police believed her. Officers found the bindings. They photographed bruises. They collected DNA. Detectives took notes. And they noticed something unusual. Kara described the man's behavior with disturbing clarity. He was organized, controlled. He brought his own restraints. He spoke in full sentences. He took pictures. He said he would come back if she talked. Within weeks, similar attacks were reported in Mountlake Terrace, Everett, and SeaTac. Different cities. Same pattern. A masked man. Zip ties. Blindfold. Threats. Precision. The cases were linked. By December 2008, the media had given him a name. The Bind, Torture, Kill Killer. The BTK of Washington State. Detective Stacy Galbraith of the Lakewood Police Department joined the task force investigating the assaults. She had worked sex crimes for over a decade. She believed patterns mattered. She believed victims mattered more. In February 2009, DNA evidence identified a suspect, a former Army Ranger named Mark O'Leary. He lived quietly. He worked construction. He had no criminal record. He was arrested on March 10, 2009, in SeaTac, Washington, without resistance. Inside his apartment, police found zip ties, masks, a digital camera, and hundreds of photographs. Photographs of women, bound, blindfolded, terrified. During interrogation, Mark O'Leary did not deny what he had done. He confessed to everything. He described his methods, his planning, his rehearsals, his timing. He spoke without emotion, without apology, as though discussing weather. Then he mentioned something unexpected. A woman, from Linwood, from August, who had reported him, who had recanted. Detective Galbraith felt her stomach tighten. She requested the file. The report arrived the next morning. Marie Adler, age 18. Case marked unfounded. Victim recanted. Galbraith read the statement, then read it again. She compared the details. The zip ties, the blindfold, the threats, the camera, the timing, the behavior. It matched perfectly. Marie Adler had described the same man 7 months earlier, and no one had believed her. On March 16, 2009, Detective Galbraith drove to Marie's apartment. She did not wear a uniform. She carried no badge in her hand, only a folder. Marie answered the door slowly. She was thinner, her eyes hollow. She did not recognize the detective's face, but she recognized the look. Authority, suspicion, judgment. Galbraith spoke gently. She said her name. She said she worked in Lakewood. She said they had arrested the man who hurt her. Marie did not respond. She stared at the floor. Her hands shook. Galbraith sat down. She said, "I believe you." Marie broke. She cried without sound at first, then violently, as if grief had been waiting for permission. She told the story again. Every detail. This time without interruption. This time without disbelief. This time without accusation. Galbraith listened, and she recorded everything. On March 18, 2009, Linwood police reopened the case. Silently, without apology, without public statement. Detectives confirmed that Mark O'Leary's DNA matched the sample taken from Marie's body months earlier. The evidence had been sitting in storage, unexamined, ignored. Marie was informed 2 days later. She sat at the same small kitchen table where she had signed her recantation. Now she was told it had been wrong, that she had been right, that she had always been right. There was no ceremony, no correction in the newspaper, no announcement to the public, just a quiet acknowledgement that the system had failed her. Mark O'Leary was charged with 8 counts of rape, burglary, kidnapping, and stalking across multiple jurisdictions. Marie's case became the first. In September 2010, O'Leary pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 327 years in prison. Marie did not attend the sentencing. She watched the news coverage from her apartment. She listened to reporters describe the monster, the predator, the serial rapist, the man who had ruined lives. No one mentioned her name. Months later, Marie would say she felt like a ghost standing beside her own story, present, invisible, unacknowledged. She received an apology from the city, a formal letter, typed, brief. It said mistakes were made. It did not say who made them. The detectives who pressured her resigned later that year, not because of her, but because of public scrutiny that finally arrived when journalists uncovered the truth. Marie changed her name. She moved. She avoided cameras, avoided interviews, avoided recognition. But the damage had already shaped her. Not only what was done to her, but what happened after. She had learned that telling the truth did not guarantee safety, that evidence did not guarantee belief, that authority did not guarantee justice. She had learned that credibility in America was fragile, and survival did not always look heroic. Sometimes it looked like silence. Sometimes it looked like surrender. Sometimes it looked like signing your own truth away just to make the questioning stop. Marie Adler had been assaulted once by a stranger, and then again by disbelief. The second wound took longer to heal. In the years that followed, her case became famous. Books were written, articles published, a Netflix series produced. Audiences watched, judged, cried, raged. But Marie lived the version without background music, without edits, without credits. She lived the version where truth was lonely, where justice came late, where belief was conditional. And in thousands of quiet rooms across America, other women watched her story unfold and recognized themselves, because Marie was not unique. She was simply the one who was finally heard. In the spring of 2011, long after Mark O'Leary had been locked inside a concrete cell at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, the story most Americans thought they knew began to change. It did not begin with Marie. It began with paperwork, public records request, a thin envelope mailed to a freelance journalist in Seattle named Catherine Beckett. Inside were police reports, interview transcripts, internal emails, and a single document stamped in blue ink. Victim recantation statement. August 14, 2008. Marie's name sat at the top, her signature at the bottom. The space in between told a story no one had ever been meant to read. On May 3, 2011, Beckett published the first article. It ran in a regional paper with little fanfare. The headline read, "Rape victim pressured to recant, later proven true. Took 6 hours to spread. 6 days to explode. 6 weeks to force a national conversation." By July, cable news vans lined the streets of Linwood, Washington. Reporters stood outside the same apartment complex where Marie's life had split in two. They filmed the parking lot, the stairwells, the door she once opened to men who did not believe her. Marie did not appear. She refused interviews. She refused photographs. She refused to speak. But her silence was no longer invisible. The city of Linwood issued a statement on July 12, 2011. It was 4 paragraphs long. It said the department regretted any distress caused. It said procedures had since been reviewed. It said the matter was deeply unfortunate. It did not say wrongdoing. It did not say coercion. It did not say her name. Civil rights attorneys did. On August 4, 2011, the American Civil Liberties Union announced an inquiry into Linwood Police Department practices. By September, the Department of Justice followed. Federal investigators arrived quietly. They requested files, interviewed officers, reviewed interrogation footage that had never been released to the public. They watched Marie's interview frame by frame. They saw how her story was interrupted, how her words were reframed, how doubt was planted, how authority became pressure. They noted the moment she stopped speaking. They noted the moment she began apologizing. They noted the moment she signed. By November 2011, the findings were complete. They were never fully published, but they were leaked. The phrase appeared in documents repeatedly. Psychological coercion. Not illegal, not criminal, but devastating. The detectives involved resigned before disciplinary hearings could begin. They cited stress, early retirement, health reasons. No charges were filed. No court dates were set. No sentences were given. The law, it turned out, did not know how to prosecute disbelief. Marie filed a civil suit in January 2012. It was settled out of court 6 months later. The amount was undisclosed. The agreement included a non-disclosure clause. She was paid for her silence. Again. But this time, the world was already listening. Netflix announced a documentary series in 2016. Writers contacted her through attorneys. Producers offered to tell her story carefully. She declined. She said the truth had already cost her enough. The series was released anyway. Audiences watched actors reenact her interrogation. They watched a young woman shrink in a chair. They watched doubt grow louder than memory. They watched justice arrive too late. For many viewers, it was shocking. For survivors, it was familiar. Hotlines reported increased calls after each episode aired. Social workers noticed the pattern. Women said they were afraid, not of attackers, but of being doubted. College campuses across the country held screenings. Panel discussions followed. Professors spoke about trauma. Police chiefs defended procedure. Survivors told their stories, some for the first time. In October 2017, the Washington State Legislature passed new guidelines for interviewing sexual assault victims. They recommended trauma-informed training. They discouraged leading questions. They warned against repeated interrogations. They cited Marie Adler by name. But Marie did not attend the hearing. She lived in another state by then, working under a different name, renting a small apartment near a coastal highway. She avoided headlines, avoided documentaries, avoided mirrors when she could. Her friends said she trusted few people, that she locked her doors 3 times, that she still slept with the lights on, that sudden noises made her hands shake. She followed the news anyway. She read articles about herself written by strangers. She learned how her life had become a lesson, a case study, a warning, a symbol. She never felt like one. To her it was simpler. She had told the truth, and the truth had not been enough. Mark O'Leary wrote letters from prison, to no one in particular, to newspapers, to victims, to his family. He apologized. He blamed his childhood. He blamed stress. He blamed the army. He blamed alcohol. He never blamed the police. He never blamed the system. The system, after all, had helped him. By doubting her, it gave him time. Time to hurt others. Time to perfect his methods. Time to become a serial offender instead of a single name in a report. 7 women testified against him in court. Marie was the first, the one who could have stopped the rest. She sometimes thought about their faces, women she never met, lives she might have saved. Guilt wrapped itself around her memory, even though the failure was not hers. Trauma does not respect logic. It only repeats questions. What if? Why didn't? If only. In 2019, Linwood Police Department announced new training requirements. They released a statement calling Marie's case a turning point. They did not apologize publicly. They did not invite her back. They did not ask how she was surviving. They called it progress. Progress, for her, meant surviving another day without hearing the word recant, without seeing her signature reproduced on a screen, without remembering how tired she was that night, how small the room felt, how badly she wanted it to stop. She learned to measure healing differently, by grocery trips without panic, by nights with 6 hours of sleep, by friendships that did not demand explanations, by mornings where her reflection did not look like a stranger. America learned something too, that victims do not always sound confident, that fear rearranges memory, that authority can feel like safety or threat depending on where you sit, that systems built to protect can also erase, that silence does not mean lying, that signatures do not equal truth. Marie Adler became proof, not that justice always wins, but that truth can survive even when buried, even when stamped unfounded, even when signed away. Her story did not end with a prison sentence. Continued in classrooms, in courtrooms, in policy manuals, in whispered conversations between women deciding whether to report. In every moment someone asked themselves the question, will they believe me? And in Linwood, Washington, in an apartment complex that looks like every other in America, the walls still stand. The rooms still exist. The door still opens. But the echo of disbelief never fully left. It only learned to speak in other voices, other cases, other names, other women. Marie was not the last. She was the one history could no longer ignore. By the winter of 2018, nearly a decade after Mark O'Leary was sentenced to spend the rest of his life in prison, Marie Adler existed in a country that knew her story but did not know her face. She lived in Astoria, Oregon, a coastal town where fog rolled in quietly and people rarely asked questions. She worked at a small bookstore near the harbor, shelving paperbacks, ringing up tourists, answering the same gentle questions about the weather and ferry schedules. No one there knew her name. That was how she wanted it. But the story followed her anyway. It followed her in headlines she avoided reading. It followed her in college lectures she never attended. It followed her in podcasts and documentaries she never watched. It followed her in the voices of strangers who said her name without knowing what it felt like to carry it. Marie tried to build a life that did not revolve around one night in August. Some days she succeeded. Other days she folded. Trauma did not fade. It learned new disguises. It hid inside door locks, inside footsteps on stairs, inside men who stood too close in grocery store aisles, inside the smell of cold rain. She still remembered the exact moment the detective slid the paper across the table in 2008. The sound of the pen rolling, the way the room seemed to shrink. She remembered thinking that signing her name might be the only way out. She did not know she was signing into history. In January 2019, the Washington State Criminal Justice Training Commission released new statewide protocols for sexual assault investigations. The document was 74 pages long. Marie's case appeared on page 12. It was labeled, "A failure of process, not a failure of empathy, not a failure of ethics, a failure of process." Marie read that sentence online late one night. She laughed, once, quietly, then closed her laptop. That same year, she received an email from a woman in Spokane. The subject line read, "You saved me." The woman wrote that she had reported an assault in 2017. She had almost withdrawn her statement. She had remembered Marie's story. She had stayed. The case had gone to trial. The man had been convicted. "I don't think I could have done it without you," the message said. On the morning of August 13, 2008, the city of Linwood, Washington, was already awake. Commuters moved along Highway 99. Coffee shops unlocked their doors. Sprinklers clicked across quiet lawns. Nothing about the day suggested it would become a date remembered in police files, court transcripts, and the private nightmares of a young woman who would soon learn how fragile truth could be when it belonged to someone powerless. Her name was Marie Adler. She was 18 years old. She lived alone in a small apartment complex run by a state-assisted housing program for former foster youth. The building sat less than 2 miles from the Linwood Police Department, a pale structure tucked behind a grocery store and a strip mall. Marie had moved there only months earlier, carrying a single suitcase, a few second-hand dishes, and the belief that adulthood meant safety. She was wrong. Marie did not sleep the night before. She lay on her bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to every car door slam outside, every footstep in the hallway. The smell of duct tape still seemed trapped in her apartment, lingering like something alive. When the sun finally rose, she sat up slowly, shaking, and dialed 911 with hands that barely obeyed her. At 9:22 a.m., her call was logged. She told the dispatcher a man had broken into her apartment just after midnight. She said he wore a black ski mask. She said he tied her hands behind her back with plastic zip ties. She said he blindfolded her. She said he raped her. She said he warned her not to call the police, not to tell anyone, not to scream. She said she was afraid he would come back. The dispatcher told her to stay where she was. 2 officers arrived 12 minutes later. They were polite. They were calm. They were skeptical. Marie sat on the edge of her bed, knees pulled to her chest, wearing the same clothes she had slept in. Her voice shook as she repeated what she had already said. The officers asked her to start again. Slowly, clearly, from the beginning. She did. They asked how tall he was. She guessed. They asked his race. She said she did not know. They asked why there were no signs of forced entry. She said he might have picked the lock. They asked why she waited to call. She said she was scared. They wrote everything down. Then they asked her to go to the hospital. At 11:04 a.m., Marie was admitted to the sexual assault unit at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle. A nurse photographed bruises on her arms. A forensic technician collected DNA samples. Her clothes were sealed into plastic bags. The exam took 4 hours. Marie stared at the ceiling the entire time. She thought the worst part was over. She did not know the hardest part was just beginning. The journalist did not publish the letter. Some apologies arrived too late to be useful. Marie never read it. She did not want his words anymore. She had carried his silence long enough. On August 11, 2023, 15 years after her assault, Marie visited Washington for the first time since she left. She drove past Linwood, past the apartment complex. She did not stop. She kept driving, north, toward the coast. She parked near a beach outside Mukilteo. She walked alone. The water was gray, the wind cold. She stood with her hands in her pockets and watched waves erase footprints. She whispered something into the wind. Not a speech, not forgiveness, just a sentence. I told the truth. No one answered, but she did not need them to. She returned to Oregon the next day, back to the bookstore, back to anonymity, back to a life shaped by something she did not choose but refused to let define her entirely. The world remembered her as a case, a lesson, a headline, a cautionary tale. Marie remembered herself as a girl who survived, who was doubted, who broke, who kept living. The distance between those versions never fully closed, but it narrowed, slowly, year by year, breath by breath. And in police academies, in courtrooms, in classrooms, her name remained. A warning written into procedure, a reminder etched into policy, a quiet voice echoing where once it was erased. Not loud, not celebrated, but no longer invisible. There is no official ending to a story like Marie Adler's. There is no final courtroom scene that repairs what disbelief dismantled. No sentence long enough to restore lost years. No verdict that teaches the body how to feel safe again. There is only what remains. In 2024, Marie was 34 years old, older than the detectives who doubted her had been when they questioned her. Older than the girl who once sat in a small interview room wondering if the truth was worth the cost. She still lived near the water, still worked among books, still avoided cameras, still preferred silence to explanation. Her neighbors knew her as quiet, polite, reliable. They did not know her history. They did not know how many nights she woke with her heart racing, how often she checked locks, how carefully she chose where to sit in public places, how deeply distrust had rooted itself into her nervous system. Trauma does not announce itself. It whispers through behavior. Marie had learned how to function with those whispers, how to grocery shop, how to smile, how to hold conversations that never touched the past. She had learned how to be ordinary. That was her victory. Across the country, her case was still taught in criminal justice programs, still cited in policy training, still referenced in debates about police reform, still discussed in survivor support groups. But she remained distant from it. She did not attend conferences, did not join advocacy boards, did not become a public speaker. She had no desire to turn pain into performance. Her survival was private. That privacy was sacred. Yet the ripple of her story continued. In Chicago, a young woman named Lila reported an assault in 2020 and refused to withdraw her statement when pressured. In Dallas, a detective changed his interview approach after watching the documentary. In Phoenix, a prosecutor reopened a case that had been dismissed because a victim seemed uncertain. These changes were small, quiet, uncelebrated, but real. Systems rarely collapse from one story. They shift slowly, from pressure, from repetition, from uncomfortable truths that refuse to stay buried. Mark O'Leary would die in prison one day. Marie knew that. The calendar would reach that date eventually. But his death would not mark the end. His name would fade. Hers would remain, not as a person, but as a lesson. And lessons are heavy things to carry for someone who never volunteered to teach. Sometimes Marie wondered who she might have been. If the police had believed her the first time. If the case had been handled with care. If her name had never been printed. If she had never learned how fragile credibility could be. She imagined alternate lives. College, marriage, children, ordinary stress, ordinary fear, ordinary heartbreak. Not the kind that lives in your bones. But speculation did not heal. It only reopened doors. So she stayed in the present. She planted herbs on her windowsill. She learned to bake bread. She adopted a gray cat that hated strangers. She learned that joy could be quiet, that safety could be constructed slowly, that trust could return in fragments. And sometimes that was enough. In August 2025, on the 17th anniversary of her assault, Marie wrote something for the first time. Not for the public, not for a court, not for history, for herself. She wrote, "I did not imagine it. I did not lie. I did not deserve to be doubted. I did not deserve to disappear." She folded the page and placed it beside the email from Spokane. 2 pieces of proof. Not for the world. For her. The documentary series would end. The credits would roll. Viewers would turn off their screens. They would talk about the injustice. They would shake their heads. They would feel outrage. And then life would continue. But Marie's life did not reset when the episode ended. Continued the way it always had. Quietly, persistently, bravely. The cost of disbelief is not measured in lawsuits. Not in policy changes. Not in prison sentences. It is measured in how long a person takes to feel human again. In how carefully they learn to trust their own memories. In how often they question their right to speak. Marie Adler was believed too late. But her truth survived long enough to matter. That is the cruel compromise history sometimes offers. Not justice, but proof. And proof, once spoken, does not vanish again. It waits, in files, in voices, in the space between doubt and courage. In every moment someone chooses to listen instead of dismiss, to ask instead of accuse, to believe instead of erase. This story is not only about what happened to one woman in Linwood, Washington, in August 2008. It is about what happens every time power is mistaken for certainty. Every time fear is mistaken for deception. Every time silence is mistaken for guilt. It is about the fragile distance between truth and disbelief, and how easily that distance becomes a grave. Marie Adler did not become a symbol by choice. She became one by survival. And survival, in a world that did not listen, was its own form of testimony. This is what remains. Not just a case file, not just a headline, not just a documentary, but a voice that refused to stay buried, even when no one believed her. If you did find this video intriguing, please like, comment, and subscribe to our channel for more fascinating true crime stories, and do well to tap the next video on your screen. See you on the next.